Hey there, everyone. Today we're going to talk about something that's been on my mind lately. It's about user stories and the mistakes that people make when writing them. I mean, these mistakes can really kill your product, and that's not good, right? So I thought, hey, why not share the top 10 mistakes and help people out? You know what I'm saying? All right. So mistake number one is writing user stories that are too vague. The ones that are like, as a user, I want to do something, but they don't really specify what that something is. It's like, come on, give me some details, people. Your developers are going to be scratching their heads, wondering what the heck they're supposed to do. So make sure your stories are specific, measurable, achievable, relevant, and time bound. That's like the key to success. Moving on to mistake number two, and this one's a biggie. It's when people focus on features instead of benefits. I mean, sure, features are cool and all, but what's the point if they don't actually help the user, right? When you're writing user stories, you got to think about how they're going to benefit the user. Ask yourself, how is this going to make their life easier or solve their problems? That's what really matters. Okay, so mistake number three is when people don't prioritize their user stories. It's like they've got this huge list of stories and they're like, let's do them all. But that's not really realistic, is it? You got to prioritize based on value to the user and the business. Use those fancy techniques like Moscow or Kano to figure out what's really important. Otherwise, you're just going to be running around like a chicken with its head cut off, trying to do everything at once. All right, mistake number four is writing stories that are too large. I know the ones that are like, as a user, I want to solve world hunger. I mean, that's great and all, but it's not really achievable in one story, is it? You got to break it down into smaller, more manageable chunks. Keep your stories focused and small, and you'll be much better off. Mistake number five is ignoring acceptance criteria. It's like, you've got this user story, but you don't really know what success looks like. That's where acceptance criteria come in. They're like the guardrails that keep your team on track and make sure everyone's on the same page. Without them, you might end up with something that technically meets the requirements, but doesn't actually solve the problem. Okay, mistake number six is forgetting about non-functional requirements. It's easy to get caught up in the functionality of your product, but you can't forget about things like performance, security, and usability. These are just as important as the functional stuff, so make sure you're including them in your user stories. You don't want to get to the end of your development cycle and realize that your product is slower than molasses or has more security holes than Swiss cheese, right? Now, get ready for mistake number seven, because this one's going to shock you. Are you ready? Okay, here it is. Using user stories as a substitute for communication. I know, right? Mind blowing. But seriously, some people think that just because they've written a user story, they don't need to actually talk to their team. That's a big no-no, people. User stories are great, but they're not a replacement for good old-fashioned communication. You got to keep those lines of communication open and make sure everyone's on the same page. All right, moving on to mistake number eight. This one's about treating user stories like a contract. I mean, sure, they're important, but they're not legally binding or anything. They're more like a starting point for discussion and negotiation. If you treat them like they're set in stone, you're going to lose that flexibility that makes agile development so great. So don't be afraid to make changes or have those conversations with your team. Mistake number nine is neglecting to involve your stakeholders. I know, it's easy to just focus on the development team, but you can't forget about everyone else who has a stake in the project. That means your customers, your sales team, your support team, and anyone else who's going to be impacted by your product. Their input and feedback can be super valuable when you're writing user stories, so make sure you're involving them in the process. And last but not least, mistake number 10 is forgetting to iterate and refine your user stories. Just because you've written them doesn't mean they're perfect. As you learn more about your users and their needs, you're going to need to make changes and updates. That's just part of the process. Don't be afraid to throw out stories that don't make sense anymore or to make changes based on new information. That's the beauty of agile development. It's flexible and adaptable. So there you have it, everyone, the top 10 user story mistakes that are killing your product. I hope this has been helpful and maybe even a little entertaining. Remember, user stories are just one part of the agile puzzle, but they're a really important part. If you can avoid these mistakes and follow best practices, you'll be well on your way to creating a product that your users will love. Thanks for listening and happy story writing. Don't forget to like, share, and subscribe for more agile development tips and tricks. Until next time, keep on sprinting and writing those awesome user stories.